Good morning. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy half term. Happy halfway through February. Wow, lots of stuff. It was spring. I heard earlier. I think 28th of February. It won't be dark after 6 after 6 in the morning and before 6 at night. So that's all good stuff to look forward to. Anyway, I'm Rob Quickenden, CTO here at Cisilion. As always, I'm joined by members of our fabulous customer advisory board. So thank you for joining us. I'll let you introduce yourselves very shortly. And as you do that, seeing it's Valentine's Day, I'm really keen to know, are you a Valentine's Day yes or no? And if you're a yes, what are you doing or plan to do? So I'll hand over to my team. Dave, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Rob. So David Maskell, Information Security Officer at Thatcham Research. Valentine's Day, yes or no? I think that's a tricky one. So no, but yes, I think is the answer. I think the safe answer is to say yes. And, doing the normal things, flowers and going out for a meal.
Aidan, you're an old romantic. What about you?
Card, flowers and meal. But kind of in rather than out, so we'd have to get a dog sitter.
And Alex?
Yeah, the same. My wife, yes. So the answer is yes, and the same: cards, flowers, and dinner. But it might not be tonight because we've got to sort the kids out. So at some point in the next few days, I'm sure.
So I suppose I should probably elaborate on mine as well. So no, really, we've kind of always got this rule now that we don't do Valentine's Day really. But so every year we kind of have this. No, we're not going to do anything, and of course I always end up doing stuff, but on behalf of the kids. So I took the kids shopping yesterday, and I can say this on air, right? And they it being half term, my wife's going on about the fact that she's stuck in this house with three boys and a cat who's also a boy. And so Oliver, my eldest, who's 7, bought her a candle, a scented candle, and he wrote in the car, which I had nothing to do with. He wrote in his car something along the lines of, "Dear mummy, because you've got to live with 3 stinky boys, here's a scented candle to get rid of the boy smell." So that was Oliver's romanticness this morning to my wife. So anyway, we divert, but happy Valentine's Day. So why are we here today? So today we're talking a little bit about what I think is quite topical from everything we read at the moment around impending recessions. It's great that we just avoided by the look of it a recession at the moment, but it's probably coming. We continue to see surges of redundancies from a lot of the big tech firms. It was Zoom last week with I think 15% of the workforce. I wanted to put a little bit of positive spin around some of these things because I think that the media is very good at talking doom and gloom, and there's certainly a lot of challenges I think facing all of us, which we're going to talk about today, which is really driving I think much more conversations around cost control, getting the best out of what we're investing in, and kind of proving that net worth. I think if we tackle the kind of unemployment, the employment level things at the moment, I think we're still in a pretty good place really as a country. Right, we're not in mass unemployment. I think the big redundancies that we've seen from the tech firms are quite a resetting of expectation. You look at some of the recruitment and some of the huge numbers of heads added to these big tech giants over the last few years since the pandemic. I think a lot of this is just kind of a resetting to more of a normal level and a bit of a reinvestment. So I think I don't get too dug down on those things personally, and I think IDC shared some data last week about what they are expecting from a growth, in particular in the IT sector, and their view is between 4.5% and 9% growth this year, generally across the tech industry. And again, a question I'll ask you in a moment to comment on is the same report said that 77% of CIOs actually expect higher spending in 2023 than last year. So I guess my first question to you all really is are you feeling this kind of squeeze from inside the business? Is there a push to control costs? And where do you think spending will be within the IT space this year compared to last? Who wants to go first?
I'll take it from my side. So firstly, I think it's awful when anyone has to lose their job. I think considering some of the profits that companies are making, it's just always terrible. The one, as you say, the one positive spin is I think there's always IT jobs out there. So I think that there's always the option and the ability, hopefully, for people to get back into work pretty quickly. From our side, it's difficult for me to get new hires through the business at the moment, or expansion roles, as we would call them. Replacements, obviously, is natural churn. So if that happens, then we can do that. But trying to advocate and put investment cases for new roles is very difficult, especially, again, in technology or technology departments, where you're not really earning money for the business, you're actually a cost to the business. And so it's difficult to attribute the value of what someone in my team in a security role or a support role or anything really it's difficult to kind of convince the finance teams or the business as a whole that this is beneficial, even though it might say so in the investment case. So we're having to just work with what we've got and accept that we're not necessarily going to be able to do everything we wanted. Even if the business is expecting it, it's okay to say no. And if they ask why, say, well, literally at capacity. So we're all about optimizing our processes or identifying our processes this year, trying to see where improvements can be made in things like automation or training for staff, to try and reduce the burden on the IT team, to then deliver projects, but also not bite off more than we can chew. And like I say, it's okay, or I believe it's okay to say no, and ensure that the team are not overloaded, because it's very easy to just quickly take more and more and more things on when we don't have the luxury of just getting another 5 or 6 or 7 people in headcount, which is kind of the things you need. So you can only work with what you've got, and so that I'm spending a lot of my time trying to reassure staff that it's okay to say no, and that we can only work as hard and as fast as we can. So that's my sort of 2 cents on the table.
No, thanks. And I think that's important. I mean, do any of you see a slowdown in your areas? Are you seeing investment cuts? Are you being pushed, or are you looking at where you can trim that fat? Right. So are there multiple products? We've talked on previous shows about the breadth of security products, and I think no one's going to invest less in security, particularly kind of where we are with the huge, ever-increasing number of threats. But of course, something has to give. I think, Alex, you touched on security as being, it's a bit invisible. It's that thing that's just kind of, it's there. You expect it to be there. Your staff, your customers kind of presume it's there, but it's big spend, right? Are there areas in there? Are there other areas where you're being forced, or you're looking at kind of consolidating and streamlining those things?
Not necessarily cutting or consolidating, but again, it's just being more aware of what is needed or what's being required by the business. And as long as we can log it and store it and know that it's on the backlog or what have you, if the business then says, why hasn't this been done? You can point to the long list of things that we're still trying to get through. It's not like the team is sitting on their hands, not doing anything all day. They are always busy. And so I think as leaders, it's important that I can show to the business what we're doing. To a degree, if your teams ever moan about having to use a ticket system or using project management tools, this is the perfect time to actually say, well, this is the reason why we're doing it, so that I can prove to the business how busy you people are. And so I can go to battle for you to prove that we're doing everything we can with the current tools and the current manpower that we have, and that if they want us to work faster, they have to invest in us. That's it. And otherwise, they have to accept that this is the pace we can work with. And I'm very comfortable.
It's more about doing more with the same rather than doing more with less. It's about just really
it's doing as much as you can, but I've got to be careful and mindful of, especially at the moment with we're still working remotely, or we're kind of default remote now. I don't get the luxury of speaking to everyone as often as I would if I'm just sat next to them in the office. So I have to be very mindful of my team's own mental well-being and what they are able to do and how they feel. And it's very easy to throw another task at someone and just add it to their backlog, but you don't realise what potential pressure they're under. And again, if you take security, there's incidents every single day. Yet the same person is supposed to be doing security projects as well. And it's like, well, you've got to find that delicate balance of the two. It's very easy to lose sight of the fact that you've just thrown another 10 security incidents at that person, and the business is expecting it to be done within whatever SLAs and timeframe that you set. So the more that they can log what they are doing allows me to go to bat for them to prove that they are working as fast as they can and as hard as they can. And I'm very comfortable doing that.
Fab. Dave, what from your side, are there kind of areas of the business that are seeing bigger investments? Is that investment coming from somewhere else? Is there, what are you seeing generally as a trend across the team?
Yeah, so I think during the COVID times, we actually invested in additional sites and we increased headcount quite significantly during that time. So I think there was a good period of growth over the last 2 years, even with the COVID lockdowns and all the challenges that had. That does mean now, though, that this year is a bit of a consolidation year. There's systems and services that we put in place, quite frankly, sometimes in a bit of a rush. The Teams meeting rooms and all those sort of things. But now we could take a little bit of more time and optimize those and make those better. One of my challenges, particularly with something like Teams, for example, is that we have more teams than we have colleagues, which doesn't seem to be quite right. I think that just expanded and the business had need for it, but we now need to go back and start that consolidation. But I can really only echo what Alex was saying there, really, around that transparency. It's the bit that's over the last couple of years that I think really adds value, where you could take all those projects, all the things that your teams are doing day to day, and put it out there so other people can see it. It's not just IT are doing all this work behind the scenes and they can do a load more. This is the things we're doing. This is why we've prioritized that. And the business can challenge those questions and ask me and challenge me to say, why are you spending your time on security or whatever else? And we can have a risk-based debate on that, and we can obviously decide and really do different approaches if we need to.
And I think there's a lot in there, isn't there, around actually, a couple of you have touched on it now, the value that IT has. And I think, IT is shifting from being that thing that fixes stuff that's kind of behind the scenes, gets in the way sometimes, to actually really being that enabler. I think particularly as we start looking at some of the join up and integration that I know a lot of you are involved in, that kind of business process automation side of things, that's really showing value that IT gives rather than IT being a cost. I mean, for years we've talked about, IT being an enabler rather than a cost center. But I think it's, Alex, your point, I think earlier, was there's still that mindset sometimes that does everyone know the value that IT actually brings to the organisation? Aidan, have you got any thoughts on that from your side?
I suppose the value IT brings to the organisation is always very obvious when things go wrong. It's always very obvious when things go wrong, exactly how much value you are because of how fast people want stuff fixing, really. I think the cost challenge is real. I think we've had that for the last 2 years running since we signed our new corporate structure, and very much kind of more working from a zero base upwards than the historic kind of where we do things. And I think the stuff we plan to do, which some of it's taken longer than we'd have liked for reasons I won't go into, but as a result of that, then you're in the situation where we're very careful about sort of setting roadmaps as to what we're doing over the next calendar year versus our financial years. And I think we've got 6 open vacancies at the moment, so there is that aspect of turnover of staff which we're seeing, and the big impact of that really is just the loss of knowledge really of the team, because if you look at the turnover, then it takes time to build the knowledge of the core systems and the rail way of doing things. I suppose the joys of any sort of vertical is someone coming into it. You've always got the weird and wonderful things. They do it in a particular way because that's the way that vertical does it. And I think, yes, where possible, we've promoted internally within the teams, but you get to a point where we've done as much as we can do with that. We need to get people in and get those heads in, and then it does affect what you're planning to do, because if you've lost that number of different roles in certain teams within IT, then that inherently has a knock-on effect on how long it will take to do some things, because you just don't have the depth and knowledge there, which needs time to build back up. So I think we're seeing it on 2 fronts really, where we're pretty much looking at every supplier and pretty much going through a tendering procurement process to sort of see, are we getting best value from our existing suppliers and sort of some of our partner companies, as well as looking at kind of, can we consolidate systems, or can we move licensing to sort of centralize onto sort of one system instead of 2 or 3 really used by different areas of the business. we're also doing a bit more with kind of internal development of things where possible to reduce the cost of where previously we may have sort of 3 or 4 years ago gone out and bought an app for a specific thing. Well, can we develop that in-house with Power Apps instead and kind of use the Power Platform to minimise the cost of that, really? When you look at sort of 3 or 4 apps used around the business, what's the cost of that versus actually having a Power App developer in-house and sort of managing and supporting those yourself? So, I mean, the cost challenge never goes away, really. I suppose it's, are we feeling it more this year than others? I think we probably are. I think there's still some supply chain issues. It's kind of I've got some big hardware orders for switches out, and if they don't land by a certain date, then I'm going to have an awkward conversation with my CFO around my financial planning because the manufacturer may have said they'd be there, and in the next 6 weeks is going to be a very key thing as to whether they actually are there or not. And
it's been one of the biggest challenges. I mean, certainly we've had customers that have been in similar positions, right, and had refurbs and new offices and those things, and that had to actually switch vendor because of supply chain. And actually now it's about, I think to the point earlier that you made, David, about actually now going back and doing it properly. Yeah. And I guess that was kind of 2 bits I'd like to explore a little bit more, if I may. Is Aidan, you touched on a really good point about applications and stuff, and I think there was so many applications out there that organisations use, either because they've always used them or because it's bought through bits of shadow IT and those kind of things, versus that build it from within. And I think that's certainly something that we've seen a lot more of, certainly things that we are doing. How can you actually give people access to data without them having full access to an application through using technology like Power Apps or Power Platform or whatever it might be, to connect to those services and present it in the right way. That can also help us from a security perspective, because we can expose data in a particular way, but we can increase the visibility, to your point, Alex, about how do you keep people more informed if they're not there all the time, and not everyone wants to just sit through endless video calls and things. And I think the other point you touched on, Aidan, was something that we are also seeing as a provider of IT services. We are seeing more and more tenders. I mean, it's absolutely crazy the number of tenders we're now seeing, where I think organisations are going through that. Are we getting the best out of the partner that we work with? Are we getting enough out of the vendor? Do we actually need to challenge and go to market, if nothing else, just to make sure that we are getting the best value for money out of the people we work with? Are those kind of general trends that the rest of you are seeing? Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to touch on Aidan's point as well about sort of the Power Platform, we invested quite heavily last year, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, in a process optimization team to look specifically at that, to see where where the business could benefit from optimizing and automating wherever we can. And they've made some strides. My only concern is actually the potential long-term harm it may cause in that whatever is created needs to be maintained. And especially with democratizing low-code initiatives, which to a degree I'm all for, I'm also wary if that person leaves or if that person has a problem, the extra strain it could put on IT teams to understand what's been created, manage it, and ensure that, again, the data is accessed in the correct ways and it doesn't spin off everywhere. And so I have someone in my team dedicated to automation, but they're specifically looking at IT processes that we can improve on. There is a little bit of help that we're giving with other teams outside of that, but we're very careful to not go and automate everything for, say, HR or finance or what have you, because at the end of the day, if that thing goes wrong or if it needs updating, they throw it straight back at us because they don't have the skills as well. Yeah. So I think you have to make sure that you train people up in how to use things, and we've started toying with the Centre of Excellence from Microsoft around the Power Platform, which I see has some value, but it doesn't have value when every member of staff technically needs a premium license for it to kind of get the most out of it. It then becomes like, oh, that was nice, but now it's like, that's not so nice. So we're looking at ways to work with that or to do that. So I think that automation can definitely play a part, I think, in what we're looking to do this year, but we have to be very careful of how gung-ho and quick we just jump on it because it can say. It's the same with AI as well. You know, we've already had people inquiring about that inside the business and how that can make life easier. I can see it makes life easier for my team who don't like writing emails to people.
Yeah.
It can improve the quality of the emails they write. But again, we just have to be mindful of where it's getting that data from and the potential impact it could have on staff as well. So we have to be very careful.
I think some of those are really good points on the data, right? Because you know, anything you connect is only as reliable as the data is there. The AI engine kind of stuff isn't. I'm sure many of us have been experimenting with ChatGPT, and Bing has now got that engine built in, which I'm on the initial preview, and it's quite scarily clever. But you can see the potential. Just like people used to rely on search engines for everything and trust it, it's even worse now because it's writing it in a way that you would just believe it, right? You can ask it to write you an email about anything. I think that's quite key. I think the point you made about Power Platform is really interesting as well, in that, and I think you've done what I see quite commonly is that, IT is almost the test bed for this stuff, right? Because it's tech, it's low code or whatever. But I think as you start looking at those advanced services you're using and therefore the advanced licensing, right? And let's be honest, it can be expensive, right? It can be very expensive if you don't develop in the right ways. But I think that really puts that big push on ROI, doesn't it? Around if you're going to start putting processes in for other parts of the business, then essentially that's where I think a lot of those savings need to be proven, because if you can simplify process, but where it starts to pay for itself is where actually that process can replace, a lower level data entry type role that actually could be replaced by, a process or a system.
But I think the risk is potentially that businesses decide to short circuit that or circumnavigate that process and just say, well, look, this person knows a little bit about it. Everyone, if you have a specific Office 365 license, you get certain access to these tools. Knock yourself out, unless the IT team have deliberately restricted it. There's nothing technically stopping an employee from doing something like that. And I think it's then the onus is on the IT or security teams to ensure that they know everything about what's going on in their estate, because it's very easy for data to be leaked out unwillingly, but also unknowingly. But at the end of the day, who does it fall back on?
And the system did it, right? It becomes a system thing rather than
but the business just looks at it as being an improvement. You fixed that person, Bob has fixed that problem that we've been having for ages. But then Bob leaves 6 months later or a year later, and no one touches it. And then 3 years later, that thing stops working, and someone says, "How do we fix it?" And then you find out that data's been leaked for the last 3 years because it's slightly done incorrectly. So the business can see it as a perfect opportunity, but IT has to be a little bit more cautious, which is why, again, you put the investment cases in to try and bolster that side of your own team to cater for that. But the business wouldn't necessarily look at it in the same light. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, I think.
And Aidan, I know your team are looking at some of this information quite heavily. It's also quite a shift, isn't it, to kind of where that cost comes from as well. So traditionally, a lot of that cost is seen as IT. Automation and process and stuff.
I mean, I suppose
IT is kind of where I'm getting to.
Yeah, I suppose to respond to Alex's point, I think we're very clear. I mean, yes, we've looked at the Centre of Excellence. We've an internal Power Apps and SharePoint dev as well as a BI team within IT. And one of the things we've done in the last 3 years, we went from kind of having one person, one SharePoint dev, one Power Apps person, to having two, because we started to transfer more critical systems into it. The decision then was we need at least two people to have that sharing of knowledge, so that in the case of either sort of sickness, holidays, or staff change, we'd grown from kind of like, oh, this is a few nice to have apps, to kind of being we're publishing this and relying on this now. So one of our major sort of safety reporting tools is now built out of Power Apps, and it's probably the biggest thing we've got internally. But then that has regulatory impact of not reporting it fast enough. So you have to have that support structure behind it. So I would still say if we looked at the cost of buying that tool in, what we've built, which is sort of customized to us, is cheaper than we would have had to pay to sort of go to tender and buy it in, and also in the cost of the people to sort of be able to run it and support it internally. I think we've got a better product off the back of it. But we've made the choice to not do that with some of the other systems, because we've looked at other stuff and actually gone, you know what, that's too big for that. That needs an external support partner because it's a specific system. We can't build something internally, because it's not just the cost of the IT time, because we've got like a development project manager who kind of manages and gates the projects coming in, so that we can sort of say, have you got a documented process? Have you got the scope for that? Because I think the business a lot of the time will say they'd like an app, but don't have a real idea of what that app is supposed to do and what the process needs to be. And the key thing is to stop that development cycle of kind of having to redesign stuff halfway through, because then you just end up wasting the development time. It sounds quite harsh, but you end up wasting the development time because the business weren't ready. Or, I mean, my developer doesn't need to sit in a room with 3 people arguing over the colour of a button, you know. Or,
I guess that's the thing, isn't it?
The process is,
when you buy a product, it's not quite like that. And there's often a bigger business. I mean, certainly something we see is, you know, if you do it internally, there's almost no cost. I think the cost is different. It's a different cost, as you say, and it kind of shifts. I think the other thing that we see a little bit in the projects that we certainly where we've been involved with customers around a power platform and any kind of low code is also, you know, you tend to find that whatever platform you're using, you tend to find that, you know, what you pay for is always cheaper, obviously, to connect to services and products that are made by the same vendor. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we're starting to see is a little bit of a, you know, the decision as people invest more in that kind of connected services and low code is that either current or future decisions about other products that get bought change because of the costs in integrating with those products as well, because they can be huge, right, if you're using the wrong product. Is that something you're starting to see?
I would say Alex has got the very key point of what connectors do you need to use, and is it premium or is it standard? Because some of the very early conversations we got into were around the base level of licensing, included our O365 or our M365 licensing, and the decision that if it ever got to the stage where we needed the premium connectors, that would be a very different conversation to have, because does all 7,500, 8,000 staff need a copy of this app, or is it 20 or 30 people in a department only? Because that is very much the key. And whether you're using SharePoint as a back end, in effect, as a data storage tool, because the connector is a standard level version, so that it's included in the base licensing, makes a huge difference compared to if you need a Teams a SQL database at the back end, or a larger sort of. It's been very key in our initial app guidance designs with the business to say, you have to do it in this way because of this. This has a huge cost impact. And then, yes, there is the data structure, the governance guidelines around look and feel and things like that to sort of make it easier for staff, because if you have that branding guidelines internally from your guiding your brand team and things like that, then they know it's one of our apps. They know certain things will always do the same thing. It reduces the amount of training you have to do with people. I mean, the standard way of getting home or saving or things like that, then those are the things you end up sort of going down the road of lessons you learn after you've done the first one, when you kind of go, oh, it would have been really good if we ask all of these questions up front, and that stops the redesign of the data structure at the back end 3 times throughout the app, because you kind of go, what are the outputs? What reports do you need to see? Is it going to a regulatory body? What fields do you need to see? Because it reduces that right down and makes it simpler. And
I think on that, I was going to ask a question of you, in fact, and a couple of you have mentioned, you know, Centre of Excellence today, you know, governance and those kind of things. And I think, you know, what advice would you give to other people listening around, you know, if you're looking at kind of reducing the investment on product, right, you know, third-party products and tools and stuff that all have got, you know, licensing and those kind of things, and you're looking at, you know, low code as a model, what kind of advice would you give people starting on that journey to ensure they don't run into those kind of challenges around, you know, almost it becoming 3 times more expensive because people don't understand what it is they're building, right? Because it does sound easy. You go on those sort of training courses, right? It sounds really easy. Plug that in, do a graph, you know, produce the data, off you go. Look at that, it's magic. What advice?
Maybe I can jump in there. I think for me, one of the benefits I've had within our team at Thatcham is that we've actually built up our business systems team. So we took them away from product. So product team were always focused on external products and services. Yeah, the bit that's revenue generating, so that is fine. But our internal business systems and platforms were always put behind the scenes or on the backlog. So we built up a business systems team last year. And for me, the biggest benefit is actually taking it away from tech at the start. Get the business analyst looking at the problem first, getting that insight and setting the direction, rather than, quite frankly, what I would do and what some of my team would do is just jump into solution mode and quickly start pulling it together. So for me, we're still learning on that, and we have to. It's always a balance of right sizing it. We don't have to spend a huge amount of time or make it a big project, but having that different mindset, pulling those people together first, is, I think, been really valuable.
Alex, anything else? I know you've done a lot in this place.
Well, I would just start with, it's very easy to see the shiny new toy and think that that's going to fix all your problems. We've done the same. We've made the investment in the E5 license, or the M365E5 license, which comes with, thankfully, a lot of bits. And what I've stressed to the business is, before we just simply go out and buy something else off the shelf, we have to properly audit the tools we have, or the tools that you have, to make certain that the function or the whatever you're looking for doesn't exist in there, and ensure your staff are properly trained on how to use that, because otherwise you're just going to repeat the same mistake. And then you're going to have more technical debt in 2 years' time. And the one good thing, to a degree, of the E5, and to a lesser extent, obviously, the E3 or the M3, is that for us, it pretty much covers most of the bases. And yeah, things could be maybe a little bit better. But honestly, every time we even come close to discussing it, and I ask them, do we know if we've actually utilised this to the fullest extent? No one in my team can safely hold their hands up and say yes. And so until we've done that, I would find it very difficult, unless it's something brand new that we know 100% is not included in that suite of applications that we've already got. Would I even bother to write an investment case for a new piece of software? That's one of the hardest things at the moment, is proving the case for new software. I think it's one good thing, to a degree, that our finance teams have made us do, because it does make you think about, do we really need this? If it does get through, actually, it's the one thing that it's the one or two things, depending on how many you get through, that you can then actually kill if you decide that you need to save some money throughout the course of the year. And, I might be guilty of that, as we probably all are. But yeah, I would just completely try and sweat the assets you've got and be 110% sure, and look for that proof that you've done that proper audit, to ensure that you cannot do what you're looking to do with that piece of software or service or tool before going out and just grabbing the latest shiny tool off the shelf.
I think goes back to that doing more with the same thing, doesn't it? I think it's, and again, we touched on this on a previous show about just how much product and value there is in these suites that you buy, and how little people know, partly because they get renamed every couple of months just to keep people on their toes. But I think that there is a huge amount, of products within the stack. So I think Microsoft stats are about 20% of their products are well used across the estate, which kind of pushes a lot around, how do you get more out of the product? How do you drive awareness of what's there? How do you displace, whether that's, mail filtering solutions, or, polling tools, or, other video conferencing products, or whatever it might be, is, how important does that now become in really making sure that we're tight around, getting more out of that product that, we've invested in, right? A lot of people use the term, it's free, it's included, which you probably see a lot of the competition use to try and sell their products. And, the answer isn't ever going to be, you can always only use that product set. But I think there is a lot of work that can be done on looking across the tools and what's used in the business from a productivity perspective, and trying to displace some of those third-party pieces, but also really using what you've invested in, because those licenses aren't cheap. They're all going up, right? There's price rises coming on all those things. We've got to make sure we're driving the best value out of what we're doing.
Well, I think I've probably got a funnier one compared to the other chaps, in that the mix of some of the stuff means that the frontline worker SKUs in particular, given I'm pretty much 2/3 frontline worker versus a third kind of back office, mean that sometimes it's actually cheaper to not buy the Microsoft solution. Because kind of like, if you're paying for an M365 E3, and then you look at the cost of some of the bolt-ons, you kind of go, fine, okay, I would pay that to sort of get that. But when you start looking at the O365 F3 instead, and say the bolt-on price is more than the price of the actual license, it's never gonna fly when you times it up by the number of people. I suppose, I think the big thing about the Power Platform one, I'd say, is that yes, you need, before you open the gates to any sort of systems development program. I get the citizen develop the centre of excellence pack in there to restrict it down and sort of say you have to support them. You can't just open that up, because Microsoft, every free training course will say all the premium connectors till the cows come home. It doesn't mean that you're going to use it at scale across a business. So you need the technical support from IT and someone to lead it within IT to say, this is the way we do it within our business, I would say. And if you don't have the scope or capability to do that, don't do it, because it will cause you more problems, as Alex said, than you would believe. Because if you haven't got those controls in place for data governance, for kind of like cost governance of which licenses and connectors you're using, then yeah, you're making a rod for your own back with that one. It's some of the stuff you can do is great, but it needs the support centrally to sort of provide that wrapper around it to make sure that it's done in a controlled way. Because they'll show you the shiny licenses and all the courses, and you kind of go, that looks great, but I'm not paying 7,500 times X for the license for that. No, because that's not a small bill, really. I mean, I suppose the cost controls are key this year and last year, really, for us, just with the way things have gone with our sort of contract and finances. And a big part of that is just having a look at everything and saying, do you need it? How are you doing it? And thankfully, my security budget is kind of a bit more sort of protected and sort of fenced in a way, because we're an operator of essential services, so we have to comply with the National Information Security Directive as well. So kind of that is quite conscious and key, because we have conversations with the DFT all the time about what we're doing and things like that. So kind of that's ring fenced, if you will. But stuff outside that, then yeah, there's definitely everything's up for a conversation with the supplier as to kind of, are we getting the best price? And that's challenging in the time we're in with all the suppliers generally wanting to come back with price rises. Then yeah, at the end of some of our contractual periods, we're going to be in for an awkward conversation with some of the suppliers, because they're going to want to turn around and put their prices up once the contract comes to an end, and we're going to want to be getting multiple quotes to do a procurement exercise to see, are we getting best value, and do we need to change to a different product from a different manufacturer if the prices aren't going to align, really.
Yeah, I think, and yeah, I totally 100% agree. I think as we kind of come to a close, I think we've covered quite a lot of good ground today. I think, a point I'd like to ask, I guess, all of you to so Aidan, you've alluded to security being quite protected as a budget. Is that something that you all kind of see? Assumably, security is not an area that anyone's going to invest less in now, right? But there's, of course, in the same ways we talked about, we're doing more with the same. There's probably, there probably is space for making sure you've got the right products in place, getting rid of things that are overlaps, getting rid of things that you might not need. Is that a general feeling, Dave and Alex? Do you share the same views?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general, security is pretty much protected, and it'd be quite a harsh decision to start cutting that or to manage that. I think actually we've continued to increase in spending, particularly with awareness and training of our colleagues for that. So I think that's something we'll continue to invest with. The one area that I think is always under scrutiny is the consumption stuff, things like cloud services, so server resource capacity and things like that. So leveraging the tools from the big providers, AWS or Azure, to keep monitoring that and right size it according to the application or service, I think is key. But like everything, you've just got to keep your eye on it, keep reviewing it, and don't take your foot off the gas and ignore it. You've just got to keep looking at it all the time.
And is there finally any? I'll come to you actually on that other question as well, Alex. But is there any other areas when you answer that as well that you think there's going to be the drive for additional costs? Are there more things that the businesses are asking of IT that's going to help the business save money elsewhere? If you see what I mean? I don't know if I asked that the right way, but I think you know what I'm getting at. How is IT going to help? How is IT going to help drive costs down on other things? So is that through automation? Is that through outsourcing services? Is there any other kind of key things you'll see?
I think it's through automation to a degree. I think it's also through awareness. I think we have and I think we forget we play a massive part in making people aware of what tools and services we have, or what tools and services our staff can actually use. It's very easy just to get, sucked into the usual, I've got a problem, can you fix that problem? As opposed to the awareness of what that tool can actually help you achieve. I always stress to our support team and to new joiners to my team that we have a user base that comes in that's almost straight out of university. the chances of them using the full Microsoft stack in the way that we do in an office environment is kind of low. They are more cloud orientated in terms of what they've been used to. And so we take it for granted. We know what something as simple as an address book is, or how to utilize it properly, as an example, how to book a meeting. And so when we've had staff in the past demand that we improve the ability to book a meeting room, and they want us to go and find an easier system, when actually they didn't know how to use the system we had. And that can be partly laid at our door as well. And so again, it's the awareness aspect. And so last year we hired what we call a modern workplace champion to kind of do that, to champion the tools and services that we have, to also understand the process of onboarding new applications, so that we don't just go out and buy the same tool twice and then find that we're double licensed for something that does the same thing. I would like to use a whiteboard application. Did you know we've already got one built into our license SKU for Microsoft? Yeah. Might not be what they ultimately need, but we go through the process of reviewing that to make sure it does or doesn't match their needs. And then if they need something else, I'm content. I'm happy with that. I'm happy to go and request a budget, or say, right, we need to put in some budget for that. So I think certainly this year, and I think in the lean years or the tight years, I think sweating your own team to realize that they have the skill set in them, because they are on the front line. They know what the users are trying to do, and trying to get them to take just one step back and say, right, maybe one of you come off for a bit, and actually we try and fix the easy-ish request, or the request that you get frustrated with answering day in, day out. Let's try and wrap a process or an automation or training around that thing, so we don't have to do it again. Everyone wins from that benefit. Yeah. And that's where I'm trying to make some changes this year to put more emphasis on that. And I think, again, we're fortunate to have a dedicated person that can assist us with that. And I appreciate not every organisation is in the same way, but that then allows you to ensure that your licenses are being fully utilised, that you're using everything that you can. And then, as Aidan says, if you then need the premium connector, as an example, you've got enough justification to go and do it.
I think the other bit of advice I'd give, just following up, just purely from what we see with the reach of customers that we have as well, is there's lots of funding support available through those key vendors as well, whoever that is, to try and help drive usage of product, right? So whether that's through funded workshops that the vendors will sponsor, whether that's through even money to help displace. Obviously, everyone loves displacing a third-party product that they can provide as well. So I think we're seeing a lot of that in the security space at the moment, and it's aggressive, right? I think because of the point of security funding generally being relatively well protected, it's quite an aggressive space right now. So I think do reach out to partners that you work with. Do reach out to your vendor team if you've got technology that you're invested in. You've all talked about sort of E5 licensing and stuff today. If you're not consuming those services, certainly my advice to all of you and anyone listening is do try and leverage. There's quite a lot of funding available from those vendors to help drive product displacement or adoption of technology. It's got to be the right thing for you to do, clearly, but it's there, and I find that a lot of organizations don't know it's there. So I think my kind of final point is there are good ways to do more with the same. You've got to make sure it's the right product set. You've got to make sure you're working with the right partner, and you've got to push them all to get more out of them. And I think they will all do that. I think everyone knows that budgets are tighter than ever. On more to the point, we need to be able to kind of harness cash almost to make sure that we can make decisions to do things. COVID was kind of a good excuse, as we said before, to do a lot of things and maybe not do them right, just because we didn't have a choice. We had to get people working. We had to refit meeting rooms. We had to do all those kind of things. I think there's a huge amount of consolidation that can be done. So not necessarily cutting corners, but just doing it how you would have done it if there hadn't been a thing called COVID in the way to make people almost just sign off checks, right? And we certainly saw it. We certainly saw it internally. Things were being done because they had to be done, and they had to be done urgently. So that's probably my final take on things. Any last words from any of you? Any final bits of advice?
I suppose.
Valentine's Day or tech, either can go.
Well, the only one I'd probably chip in is with the frontline worker SKUs is just look at the difference between M365 and O365, because most of our frontline workers don't have a device capable of running Windows. So we buy the O365 F3 license instead of the M365, because there is no point paying for the M365 one when we literally cannot, they will never have a device which runs Windows on it because they've got Android phones. Or
that's a really
tablets.
important point, and I think with the number of users that you've got, it is particularly important. But some of the other clients that we work with, that really doing some persona mapping, I think is the official term. But really looking at, just because you bought something and giving it to everyone, there's huge amounts of value you can save by having the right license, and in some cases you do the premium things right for the users that need it. That's definitely a good bit of advice.
It doesn't have to be a one size fits all, I'd say, because I mean we've ended up on F3s because that includes email, because we've got key critical services which run on email for all the frontline staff and the back office, and everyone has an M365 license as well. There is the F1 license, which is Teams only. Now I've got Alex has got one end of the spectrum. I've got the full 5 generations in the workforce, so most of mine are very much more towards the email end rather than sort of the Teams end, and there's very much a split across the organisation that way. But if you were starting from scratch, would we ever deploy email to the frontline staff? Probably not these days, because we could buy the cheaper licenses, use Teams, and focus around that instead. We're rolling Teams out to the different depots and groups of staff, and they're starting to use it more, but kind of they're still very email focused. But I think Alex's point around adoption, I mean, we've got two members of staff basically just trying to remind people you don't have to keep emailing an attachment around. Just share it in OneDrive and edit the one thing collectively. It's still that kind of change of, but I've always done it this way. And
it's not training, is it? It's not just about training. You've got to demonstrate the value in doing, because people naturally do what they've always done. I see it, right? I mean, I've lived in the world of digital for Digital Ink and Surface and that kind of stuff for years, and I can't imagine writing stuff on sheets of. I would never do notes on sheets of paper, but it's amazing how many people buy new modern devices and that's still the default is the notebook comes out and they're scribbling, and you just see all the wonderful benefits that any piece of technology can deliver if you're not driving that adoption.
But I think you got
the business benefit of why doing it rather than training on how to do it.
That's it. You've got to find the benefit to it. I mean, to a degree, I agree with you, Rob. And for years, I've been trying to find the perfect way for me to actually remember what I've got to do. I've got probably every touch screen literally staring at me on my desk here. But ironically, I'm still writing it on a bit of paper because it's just there in front of me. And,
it works, doesn't it? It doesn't run out of battery. It works.
But that's but in a similar vein, I'm always having this battle with my parents. My mother will be on the computer all day, but she will be writing notes on scraps of paper. She's got OneNote, and whenever she's researching for a holiday or whatever, I explain how to use OneNote, and then, I'll do that. And then I still get messages saying, how do I copy and paste? And send me the link for that thing, and she'll send me a picture of Amazon web page as opposed to the URL. But that's the challenge. What is easy for us isn't necessarily easy and straightforward for others, and so that's
it takes people to learn, doesn't it? It takes people time to learn.
But they have to want to learn it as well.
Doing it, they won't do it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's finding that happy balance between the two, I think.
So I think we're all out of time, but I think key things we've covered. Just listen to what you covered today. So I think persona mapping. Absolutely make sure that you've got the right licenses for the right people and don't over provision. Consolidation where you can. Overlapping kind of related overlapping technologies. Can we consolidate? And get rid of things that we don't necessarily need. Alex, your point about challenge. When you get asked for new products, you've probably already got it in the suites of things that you've bought. So reevaluate things. And I think Aidan's point, which I'm definitely seeing, and I'm sure all of you are doing, is challenge more. Go back to your current suppliers. Anyone that's not that can't prove they're adding value. Squeeze them for more. Everyone's trying to get more out of us as the whether we're consumers or business buyers. Challenge them as well. Demand more from them. So I think that's the other thing that we're all empowered to do now as well. So, and automation, that was the last one, wasn't it? But think about automation, think about things that, you might be able to replace cheaper value by building bespoke internally, but think about the governance and the importance around getting that right, and don't just jump into it without following some guidelines. There are some good now, I think, well architected frameworks now for things like low code development and things, which are really good. Yeah, fab. I think that was really, really interesting. My other advice is what I always get told, and I would never ever do, is don't buy flowers on Valentine's Day from a petrol station. They always know, apparently. They always know. So that's my other piece of advice. Anyway, team, thank you so much. I think our next live show, we've got our normal one next month, but we've got one in a couple of weeks, just on providing some feedback and updates to the Cisco Live conference that was held last week, which I had the pleasure of going to, and hopefully not contracting COVID, but feeling quite rough on the back of it. So we'll be covering a special session on that in a couple of weeks. I think the team will put the link up shortly. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving up your time. Hope you'll find it useful, and speak to you all soon.
Thanks a lot.